Good evening, everyone. This is John Scarborough. Wanted to kind of give you all a little update over here. We got the goats in here probably yesterday, I think it was. No, it was 2 days ago. We put them in here, and a little bit of an event because, of course, you know, when you get ready to try something new, everything else has to happen bad. So we had all sorts of things happen, and anyway, we got them in there and everything seems to be good now, and so far they seem to be doing well. I haven't seen any signs of them trying to break out so far. This net's popping a pretty good bit. Wanting to get it raised up. The thing about this net is, of course, this is for the chicken netting. We wouldn't have to do something this aggressive for goats, you know, but that's what we had and we wanted to try to use it for them. But you can tell it sags in a lot of different places. I don't know if you can tell that. So I'm not sure what all applications it's going to be good for. I haven't decided whether or not it's going to be something I'm going to want to use along these creeks or not. But that's kind of something I wanted to try out and just see how it works. You know, see how well it works coming around here. And see how well it holds these goats in. Because we held them in pretty good for with wire. We did less and less wire until we finally got down to one wire. Eventually they did get through that, and what we found was with the goats is, like the sheep, it didn't seem to bother them, but with the goats we found that they were fine, but as soon as you tried to push them a little bit, as soon as they got to where there was less desirable forage that you wanted them to eat. And for me, that's kind of the reason I have goats, really, is to give them the less desirable stuff, you know. So it seemed like they started getting more curious and got out. I don't know for sure if that was why, but so far I haven't had the best luck with goats with electric fence. So we'll try this. We're going to try this netting out pretty good. I would love it if I could go along those creeks and clear up a lot of these places, because you just, without coming through here either with a weed eater and a blade on the end of your weed eater and, you know, and stuff, and cleaning up all of this and doing basically manual labor, or cutting all these trees down and then brush hogging it, which is something I don't want to do, you just can't hardly clean all of this up. So this just seems like a really good way to do this, because I can actually raise goats. Those goats can have babies, and I can raise it on parts of my farm that I could not otherwise make any income off of. I haven't put any money at all in these goats as far as feed goes at all. The whole time I've owned them, I haven't had to feed them, and I haven't even had to feed them hay. I mean, there's $0 in maintenance for these goats. And you can tell they're actually just a slight bit thinner than they were. Their coats are nice and slick. They're a little bit thinner than they were because when we had pulled them from the one farm and then brought them over to this farm, we had a little bit of trouble with our electric system, and then we had a big a rainstorm come through, and so we actually had to, I wanted to wait to put them in here because I didn't want, I wanted to see how the rainstorm was going to react. Anyway, long story short, we had them, we ended up having to hold them up, so we had fed them some hay, but so they lost a little bit of their flesh. They don't look bad at all, but I wish I could have shown y'all them a couple of days ago. But I think they're going to fatten up pretty good now that they're back in here and they got all of this. And of course, they're not unhealthy by any means. These goats have never been wormed by me, never had anything at all. I think they look great. Their coats are slick, you know. So I'm anxious to see her get bred. But you know, it's just that this spot right here, like I have several places like this. If I could get baby goats, you know, and I never put any income in them, never put any money or anything, and then sell those baby goats, but also I'm getting all of that, I'm trading them, those goats, I'm trading them this right here. This is way worse. Like, this is some really undesirable stuff right here. And you know, I could do this with sheep, and I'm not saying that I wouldn't. I may end up doing it with only sheep, but I've got the 2 goats and I just wanted to kind of try it, you know. I do find that goats seem to, even though I really like sheep, goats seem to be better like the very best thing that you can use when it comes to really woody briars. Like, and just putting them, they just thrive on that stuff, you know. So I don't know, maybe I'm just weird, but whatever it is, I really enjoy knowing that I can make an income off of something, off of just junk, complete junk that even the cows won't eat. I mean, I can make an income off of cows. I still got to feed them hay, things like that, but I can make an income off of them while feeding them grass. But we all know that grass is, you know, takes some maintenance. Occasionally you have to brush hog. You have to have some sort of a sheep or a goat or something out there to help clean up the broadleafs and things like that. And if you just stick cows out on a place by themselves, they're not, you know, eventually the pasture is going to start to get, you know, not so good. So the point is that it's kind of nice to know that I've got these goats that I'm not really having to do anything outside of moving this. Like, all they're doing is just eating complete trash, and yet they can give me baby goats, and I can actually make income on my farm from that. So might be something for some people to look at, you know, if you can figure out the electric part of it. This netting is not cheap at all. There is a guy I've been noticing out west. He seems to be pulling off the whole electric, you know, I think there are 2 wires he's using. So that's pretty impressive, the stuff he's got going on down there. Now I do think that I would do better if I had boar goats. These have some boar in them. They have some boar blood, but you can tell they have a lot of pygmy blood in them. And pygmies are not, a little bit more escape artist. They're still a meat goat, but they're a little bit more of an escape artist than some goats. But anyway, I think if they were boars, I think they would do better. Anyway, guys, I think this is going to work out pretty good in here, really. I'm excited about it. But I wanted to show y'all what I did here. This is temporary. This is not a permanent solution by any means. I'm going to see if I can get down in here without getting snake bit. Y'all can see that. This is for the creek. This is very temporary. I mean, if I knew that I was going to have a lot of water flowing through here, that wouldn't work. You know, it eventually would break it down. All we did here was just drive those stakes in and screw them together. And that, like I said, it's completely temporary, because beforehand what we had actually tried, and I knew there was about a 90% chance that it wouldn't work, but I wanted to try it in the summertime. So I actually tried fencing this down lower, a lot closer to the water, because goats don't really like water all that much. So I was kind of half hoping it would work, but I kind of knew that probably wouldn't work too well. But anyway, long story short, we did end up with a flood, and it washed it over pretty good. It wasn't bad. I don't think they would have escaped, but it was definitely kind of washing through it and grounding it out. And anyway, but that's why we waited to put the goats in there, because we wanted to make sure that that would work before we put the goats in. So sometimes it is good when you're trying something new to experiment a little bit beforehand. But what we plan to do for the creek crossing, plan to do something similar to the creek crossing that I have. I actually have a video on a creek crossing. I think it's called how to build a fence through a creek the right way. So go check that video out if you haven't seen it. It's a pretty good creek crossing. It works really, really well. I had actually, when I built that, I'd actually never seen anybody do that before. But after I put it on YouTube, I actually had several people tell me about other people who had done similar things. But anyway, so go check that video out. It's a pretty good video for building a creek crossing through a fence, or through building a fence through a creek. But I think what we'll end up doing through here is a similar version to that, but what we're going to use is cable instead of the pipe, which is something that we've done in other places. In smaller creek crossings, we've used cable, like just stretch a cable across. But I want to build something that's similar, but yet it's temporary. So it's something that will work just as effectively, but we can pull it up and move it. So anytime we move this, we're able to move that temporary crossing. I think that's going to be the best. So y'all stay tuned for that. If y'all have any good ideas on how to do it, I mean, I think I've pretty much got it figured out what I want to do. But if anybody's got any good ideas, throw some comments in there. You know, talk amongst yourselves, talk, you know, throw some stuff in there. Let's kind of collaborate on this and see what each other's ideas are on some of that. I'm pretty sure the best thing that I can come up with is stretching a cable across, having some sort of a screw-in deal that will actually screw into the soil to anchor it to, probably like those dog screw-in deals where you screw it in the ground and then you can, people use it for tying dogs up and stuff. But anyway, so I could screw that in on both sides, stretch the cable across tight, and then have like boards with little eye hooks hooked to it hanging in there. Something to that effect is kind of what I got in my mind. But something that's fairly easy to pick up and move. So I think that's what we're going to try. But my reasoning for not trying it, and I know I'm going to get somebody in the comments like, well, why did you do that? You know that's going to fall over and all like that. I'm not too worried about it falling over in the middle of summer. It might, but I'm really not too worried about it. Because if this was going to be here for very long, it would eventually start to dam up, is what it would do. But we're not. I don't think we're going to be here for too terribly long, so I'm not too terribly concerned with it. And these were all, incidentally, guys, these were all scrap cutoffs that I got from my sawmill, so that's why I wasn't worried about wasting any of it. But the reason I didn't build my little crossing there was actually because I didn't want to spend a lot of time on this design, and waste a lot of time doing that, and then only to find out that the goats in this whole system just wasn't going to work. And I'll tell you, that's kind of a danger that I've gotten myself into it, and I've talked in other videos about this. It's easy, especially when you're on a farm and you're experimenting with a lot of new stuff, it's easy to get excited about something, have what you feel like is a really good idea, spend a lot of time on perfecting that idea, and then once it all comes together, you realize that it's not going to work. And it's not your idea that it didn't work. It was one little piece that you never thought about. And then it just doesn't work, and you find out you've invested a lot of time and energy, maybe even some money, into the idea. So be careful about investing that, investing too much into an idea that may not work. And so this idea right here, we wanted to be able to graze goats or possibly sheep in the creek, like on both sides of the creek, in order to help clean the creek up. We wanted to be able to do that, but I want to know that it will work. So I didn't go out and invest in goat netting. Instead, I got chicken netting, and my reason is I know that I can use the chicken netting. I'll use the chicken netting somewhere else. So if this idea turns out to be worthless and I'll never use it again, then I didn't waste the money buying the netting, because I know that I can use this netting with my chickens. So I'm not concerned with that. If I knew for a fact that this would work, I would have just bought some goat netting. And I may do that later, And if I knew for a fact it would work, then I would have gone ahead and built this, So my advice on stuff like that, when you're experimenting with new things on the farm and stuff, is invest as little as possible when you're experimenting. Invest as little as possible without investing too little, if that makes sense. So what I mean is, you've got to kind of be committed. You've got to put some time and effort into it. But at the same time, don't put all of it into it just for an experiment like this. Because even though I could reap some really, I talked earlier about reaping some benefits of, these sheep in here basically giving me income off of trash on my farm. That's some possible benefit that I'll get from that. But what I didn't talk about, I know that I could get that, but the problem is I may not get that. You know what I mean? So the point is that there's only 2 goats in here. So it's not like the dividends are huge. Okay, now I could put more goats in here, but it would take more net wire. And with this much net wire, I could probably hold, several goats. It just depends on how much time I want to spend moving this. Ultimately, I don't want to have to, I've got a pretty big operation and I'm pretty busy. So I don't want to have to worry with moving this really more than once every 2 weeks max. I kind of would like to see them have enough forage for a month. Now, I don't know if they will or not, but I wouldn't mind seeing that. And that's because we're so busy with everything else. So if you've only got 2 goats in here, The dividends aren't huge. They're very small, okay? So the point is knowing that the dividends are small, you should also invest a little bit in the beginning. Now, once I know that all of this is going to turn out really good, you know, once I'm already really happy with the results, well, then I'll start to expand more and more, and I'll start with getting my creek crossing right and knowing that they're not going to break out of that. And then I'll probably go and buy some sheep netting or some goat netting or something like that. And I may stick with this. But the good thing about the sheep netting and the goat netting is not only is it cheaper, so you can actually get larger amounts of netting, but it's also, there's not as much contact with the soil and with other grass. So the load on it is not as bad. Right now I'm having to tie into my big charger, my 12 joule charger. Whereas if this was goat or sheep netting, I could probably just put a solar charger on there and be fine. So that's one thing, is I would probably be able to save some cost in that once I know that it will work. So I guess the question is probably going to come up, you know, how do I know that it will work? Well, the first step is, so far they haven't gotten out. So that's obviously a good sign. But the real test is, will they get out once they get curious, once they get, you know, because the goats are going to be satisfied for a while, you know, but goats are browsers naturally. They want to get out, they're curious, they're browsers. So eventually they'll get a little bit bored in this area, even if it's not completely cleaned up, even if they haven't grazed it as much as I want them to. It's not that they'll be hungry or starving by any means. It's just that they'll have eaten enough that they'll start to get bored and they'll want to move. So the question is, when they get to that point where they've gotten bored, probably within 2 weeks to a month, will they then, will they break out, or will they escape? You know, that's really the question. So we're gonna figure that out as we go, and we're just gonna leave them in here, you know, over time. And you know, we're not, like I said, we're not gonna push our animals to starving. I don't believe in that at all. Like when I talk about aggressive grazing, I'm not talking about limiting animals. I'm not talking about them being hungry in any means. I'm just talking about controlling where they are, letting them eat where you want them to eat, when you want them to eat there. That's all we really mean, okay? So I'm gonna be excited if this really will work, because that was the biggest thing we learned with the 2 and 3 wires. I mean, we even had 3 wires, and we learned that we couldn't hold them for prolonged periods of time. So we can move them. We can graze goats while moving them, while keeping them moving. We can graze them just fine. But as soon as we start to stop them, as soon as we slow them up, or we try to make them stay in an area for just a little bit longer than they would prefer, then they start getting, they become more likely to jump out of there or get out, you know. So like with cows, I can crowd cows in pretty good even with just 1 wire, you know, and that seems to work out just fine. But with goats, it seems like you start crowding them and or start making them stay a little bit longer than they want to, and those 1, 2, 3 wires, just, it's no longer enough. So, and that's just my experience. There's other people that's pulled it off better than me, for sure. But anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and sign off, guys. Thanks for watching, and if anybody else has any ideas or any comments on this, I'd love to hear your input. And I definitely like seeing other people talk back and forth with each other on the comments too, on different ideas. It's good for me, and it's good for everyone else. So as always, like and subscribe.